The Gonzaga Bulldogs are back in the top 20 of the AP poll. We discuss that and make final WCC Award predictions. Will Anton Watson get snubbed again?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Tuesday and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things just a little bit further? Do you ever wonder what adventure could be just around the next corner? Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Check them all out today at nissanusa.com. Well, folks, we got WCC Award predictions to make. As you are listening to this show, there's a chance the WCC Awards have already come out. It's early on Tuesday morning. We're making our predictions here on Monday evening. We also got an update on the Lady Zags, where they're at right now in the rankings, what their potential seed could look like, and what things look like shaping up for them as we head into the WCC tournament. So we'll get to all of that, but I want to start the show with our continued updates on Gonzaga in the AP poll. It's nice that on Tuesdays, we're no longer talking about this is how many votes Gonzaga got for the AP poll. This is how close Gonzaga got to the AP poll. This is the next time they might reasonably be in the top 25. We no longer have to have those conversations. Gonzaga has gone from 23rd, which is where they re-debuted back in the top 25 last week after being out of it since early January. Now they're up to 19th. 4-spot jump, and an entirely deserved 4-spot jump. They got 2 quad 1 wins last week, beat the 2 best teams in the WCC on the road. That certainly merits some growth in the top 25. They are now the 19th ranked team in the country. Feels about right. I thought that 23 was a little low for them last week. I probably would have had them a little bit higher this week. Somewhere, I think I had them 17th at Locked On College Basketball's top 25. I didn't actually check. It's somewhere in that range, 17th-ish. But somewhere around there, late teens, 17, 18, 19, that feels about right with their resume, with their now much, much better looking record in the quad 1 games from 1-5 to 3-5. It's a pretty massive difference in terms of how they're being perceived and evaluated when you consider some of the other top tier teams like Auburn, like Alabama, who don't have even that many quad 1 wins, it all of a sudden starts to make Gonzaga's resume and record look a little bit better. And I'm glad that that's starting to come around. It's part of the reason that for me personally, the talk of Gonzaga being on the bubble I never really bought it. Obviously if they had gone 0-2 this week, we'd be sweating. We'd be having a very different conversation right now. And part of it was that I had some confidence that Gonzaga wasn't going to go 0-2 this week, but I never felt like their resume was really on the same level of the teams that were next to them on the bubble. When Lenardi's updates would come out, it would show like Gonzaga, Seton Hall, St. John's, Nebraska, or whatever. And I'm like, Gonzaga's resume is just way better. Like, not only are they a better team than those teams, which is, I believe, but is also could be, clouded by some bias, but their resumes were just better than those teams. Like Gonzaga was showing up next to Colorado, next to Utah, next to, again, Nebraska, Providence, St. John's, etc. And it just never felt like that's where they belonged. And now Gonzaga is no longer in that conversation. Gonzaga is now are they going to get a 6th seed? Are they going to get a 7th seed? If they lose in WCC, could that drop them to the dreaded 8-9 seed? But there are no more conversations about could that put Gonzaga in a play-in game? Could that put Gonzaga out of the tournament for the first time since the 90s? Those conversations are over. And more than Gonzaga jumping back into the top 20, going from 23 to 19, all that's great. But I'm just glad those conversations are over. And I know many of you feel the very same way. Gonzaga is also up to 16th in the net right now. Again, not only are they 3-5 in quad 1 games, they're now 3-1 in quad 2 games. Slight bump. They were 2-1 in quad 1 games. They're now 3-1 because USC beat Washington. That put USC up to 96th in the net. Previously, they were only 101st, being outside the top 100 meant that game was a quad 3 game for Gonzaga, despite being a victory. Now it is a quad 2 victory for Gonzaga, assuming USC holds on to a spot inside the top 100. For Washington, they're 72nd in the net. If they fall below 75, that would actually mean Gonzaga would have another quad 2 loss, which would be more problematic than gaining a quad 2 win. Again, none of this really matters now that Gonzaga has cemented their spot in the NCAA tournament. But certainly, if the committee is getting nitpicky about who are going to be the 7 seeds versus the 8 seeds, it would be unfortunate if Washington, struggling at the end of the year, falling out of the top 75, giving Gonzaga a second quad 2 loss, is the kind of thing that the committee uses to then keep Gonzaga as an 8-9 as opposed to a 7. That's a fairly unlikely scenario, and I think Gonzaga is not on that 8-9 line unless they don't win in Las Vegas. So the ball's still in their court. If they win their 2 games in Las Vegas, they're very likely a 6 seed, 7 seed, could possibly even sneak into that 5 seed conversation, although I think more likely they end up in that 6-7 range. But still some things to keep a note on. Yale, same thing. They're not that far away from potentially climbing into quad 2 territory for Gonzaga, as it's currently a quad 3 win for the Zags. So that would be something that would help their resume out a bit as well. One of the things I want to talk about here before we move on and talk about the WCC awards, the West Coast had a pretty darn good showing in the AP poll on this Monday. Now, obviously, Arizona was the top team that's in a West Coast conference. They came in at 5th, I believe. But there was a huge stretch towards the end of the top 25 that really stood out to me. And I know many of you screenshotted this, posted it on the Discord channel, posted it on social media. So I know I'm not the only person who kind of saw this when looking at the AP top 25. 18 to 23. Here are the following, or the 6 teams in order from 18 to 23 in this week's AP Top 25. 18 is Washington State. 19, of course, is Gonzaga. 20 is BYU. 21 is San Diego State. 22 is Utah State. 23 is where St. Mary's fell, of course, after losing to Gonzaga on Saturday. That is a really great stretch of West Coast college basketball. It's also a great stretch of WCC-related basketball. Out of those 6 teams, 2 of them are current members. Of course, Gonzaga at 19 and St. Mary's at 23. One of them is a former member, BYU, who's coming in at number 20 after a huge win on the road at Fog Allen Fieldhouse against the Jayhawks of Kansas last week. One of them is a future member, Washington State, who is, of course, the highest of the teams on this group at 18, having a tremendous season under Coach Kyle Smith, despite all the loss that they had from last year's roster. To come back this year, Isaac Jones having a tremendous season for this team to be where they're at right now is one of the best stories in college basketball. So you got 2 current members, 1 former member, 1 future member. You also got the 2 Mountain West schools in San Diego State and Utah State. Really good stuff happening on the West Coast. So much of the attention on West Coast college basketball, when there is attention on it, is about how there's no depth in the Pac-12, how only 2 Pac-12 teams are going to make it, Arizona and Washington State. And a lot of that conversation is centered around the fact that USC and UCLA have been so bad. And look, it's a big story. USC was a projected top 20 team to start the year. They've been awful for the most part this season. They had the number 1 recruit in the country in Isaiah Collier, the most talked about freshman in Bronny James, really talented other players on that roster. Joshua Morgan's a great big. Boogie Ellis as a 20-point per game scorer. That team should have been really good, and they haven't been. UCLA, we were less confident what they were going to look like, but they have been tremendously bad. They've played much better as of late, by the way, much better. But for the most part, their season has been a complete disaster. Other teams that people expected more from Oregon, people expected more from Colorado, people expected more from Stanford. They didn't get it. And so I think a lot of the conversation about West Coast college basketball has been, wow, the Pac-12 really sucks. And then at the beginning of the year when Gonzaga and St. Mary's were struggling, it was like, wow, the Pac-12 really sucks. And also all the teams on the West Coast are bad. Now, Washington State has entered the conversation in a significant way. Gonzaga and St. Mary's are both playing much, much better basketball than they did at the beginning of the year. That is completely undebatable. And you also have 6 potential NCAA tournament teams coming out of the Mountain West Conference. I know the WCC and the Mountain West compete, and so the more the Mountain West has success, the less, like San Francisco has no chance of making the NCAA tournament for a handful of reasons. They needed to beat Utah State. They needed to beat Grand Canyon earlier this year. They missed those opportunities. But because the Mountain West has so many teams, it's really hard for a conference like the WCC. I mean, frankly, the Mountain West is stealing bids from the Pac-12 because the Mountain West is probably going to get 6 teams in the dance, and that's insane. We talk about it. Obviously, San Diego State's ranked 21st. Utah State is ranked 22nd. Nevada was the most receiving votes that didn't make it, so they are 26th. Boise State, who incidentally got 26 votes, is actually 28th because they were the third most teams to get votes that weren't in the top 25. Personally, for my top 25 at Locked On College Basketball, I did rank Boise State at 25. I thought they deserved to be in the top 25, and I think that they might get in depending on how they do in the rest of the Mountain West, getting into the Mountain West Conference tournament. But you also have New Mexico and Colorado State both picking up votes as well. I think all 6 of those teams could go dancing. If one of them bows out really early in the Mountain West tournament, loses to like Air Force or Wyoming or San Jose State or something like that, maybe that could change the conversation. But Mountain West is really good, and they're going to get 5 to 6 teams in the dance. That combined with the success of somebody like Washington State, of BYU moving to the Big 12 and proving how good they can be, and maybe saying a little bit about how good the WCC was last year, I think West Coast basketball is in a pretty good spot. And I'm excited to see what that future looks like, especially with Washington State in particular joining the WCC next year. We'll, of course, have just hours of conversation about that over the offseason as we get ready for that. But for right now, very exciting stuff happening in the West Coast Conference. Speaking of the WCC, is Graham Ike going to win the Player of the Year award? We're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about whether Anton Watson will get an individual award or if he's going to get snubbed again. All of that coming up after a word from today's sponsor, FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 in your pocket if your bet wins. You can bet on all your favorite Zags in the NBA players and your favorite teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. And I'm going to continue to say it. And we're going to talk about it at the end of the show. The Gonzaga women's basketball team, 250-1 odds right now to win the national championship. I'm not saying a national championship is easy, but I'm saying $5 would net you over $1,200 if it happens. I am 100% ready to make that kind of bet. If you want to join me, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. And we are going to look at my WCC Award predictions, not only who I think should win the 6 major awards in the West Coast Conference, I'm also going to give who I think is going to win. Again, 10 a.m. on Tuesday morning is when this will be announced. If you are listening to this after 10 a.m. Pacific time on Tuesday, these awards have come out. You know who the winner is for the WCC Player of the Year, Coach of the Year, etc. This is being recorded on Monday evening before we know these results. So I'm going to give you who I think should win. And I'm also going to predict who might win. We'll see if I do even half, 3 out of 6, 4 out of 6. Hopefully I can get 5 out of 6 or 6 out of 6, but I just wanted to make sure to lay it out that that is where we're at. I also want to make a quick note. Leonard Perry has been dismissed from his job as the head coach of the Pacific Tigers. I will get more into that later, either this week or certainly as we get into the offseason and we start looking at the coaching carousel and what it might mean for Pacific. Leonard Perry never really had any success with the Tigers. This year was a complete disaster for them. And I think kind of the beginning of the end was when they struggled early in the season to teams like Lemoyne and Mississippi Valley State. Hopefully Pacific can find somebody, a younger guy who can maybe come in and try to lead that program out of the cellar, but that's a tough place to coach. And I don't envy the search that they're going to have to do to try to find somebody competent to come in and lead that program. Anyway, let's get into our 6 predictions for the WCC Award, starting with Player of the Year. My prediction and my pick, Graham Ike. I get why people think it should be somebody from St. Mary's. Sean Farnham talked about this on the broadcast during the game on Saturday. I know some people on social media were kind of ribbing him a little bit about that, and I get it. But at the same time, St. Mary's almost did something that's never been done before by that program. It hasn't been done since 1992. Became a non-Gonzaga team to sweep the WCC. When you are the clear and obvious winner of the WCC, there's no tie, there's no sharing. St. Mary's has won the West Coast Conference. Typically, you do get the Player of the Year award. But there's just not somebody on this roster that deserves it. And that's not a knock on their players as much as like because they play such a slow pace and methodical and a lot of the things that don't show up in the box score that they do, you're not looking at guys who are statistically all that impressive when compared to somebody like Graham Ike. Augustus Marcelonis is excellent. He's excellent, but he didn't play all that well against Gonzaga, and he had some inconsistencies throughout the year. Aiden Mahaney is probably the third or fourth best player on St. Mary's. I just don't think he's in that conversation. Mitchell Saxon, great player, also inconsistent. Also comparing Mitchell Saxon's numbers to Graham Ike's or Jonathan Mobo's, like, it would be insane to give it to Saxon. With no disrespect to him whatsoever, it just doesn't make sense. Graham Ike is averaging 17 points, 7 boards, 1 assist, a little under a block per game. He's shooting 63% on twos. He's shooting about 80% from the free throw line. Graham Ike became the 6th WCC player ever, and I found this from a tweet from Cole Forsman, who writes for the Gonzaga Sports Illustrated site, great writer. 6th WCC player ever is Graham Ike to lead the league in scoring and field goal percentage in conference games only. The last person to do it was Jock Landale at St. Mary's in 2018. Before that, it was Quentin Daly in 1981. Before that, it was Bill Cartwright. Before that, it was Bill Russell, who did it twice. Every one of those players won WCC Player of the Year. There was one year where they didn't award it, but it would have gone to Bill Russell. So basically, it's a lock. You do that, you win WCC Player of the Year. I don't see how it can't go to Graham Ike, especially with that dominant performance that he put on against St. Mary's on Saturday. That will be fresh in the mind of the people who vote, and I think it'll lead to Ike being the Player of the Year. Coach of the Year, that's where I think you go to St. Mary's. Randy Bennett's going to be the Coach of the Year. I don't see how it could go any other direction. He was a win away from winning the WCC with an undefeated record. There have been some great St. Mary's teams, and they've never done that. Still have never done that, thanks to Gonzaga on Saturday. But people will say, well, Mark Few, is this the best coaching job Mark Few's done? That was a mailbag question I got, and I said, yeah, maybe it is, you'd think, well, that should mean he's Coach of the Year. Look, Randy did basically the same thing. Took a team that was really struggling early in the year, found ways to get them to play together. They had to replace the loss of Logan Johnson. They had to replace the loss of Kyle Bowen. They had to replace now Joshua Jefferson, which hasn't gone admittedly all that well for them, but they're still finding out how to do that. But for a team that lost a lot of key players last year, had players adjusting to new roles, like Marcelona stepping into the starting lineup, a bigger role for Alex Dukas, Joshua Jefferson stepping into the starting lineup. He's been incredible in that role. This was a hard job for Randy Bennett and Moraga, and they got it done. And Gonzaga did too, but St. Mary's was better. They won the regular season. I think Randy Bennett deserves this one, and I think it's pretty clearly going to go to him on Tuesday. Next up, Newcomer of the Year. Look, if Graham Ike wins Player of the Year, he's probably going to win Newcomer of the Year. Typically, the WCC does not demand that these results be different people. If Graham Ike is the best player in the conference, he's also the best newcomer in the conference, and he should win it. I think that's what's going to happen. I wouldn't want to give the same award or the same player 2 different awards. So I would pick Ryan Nembhard. For me, it was close between Ryan Nembhard and Jonathan Mobo. Nembhard, 13 points per game, 6.5 assists, about 4 boards. The shooting numbers are still a little spotty overall on the season, but they've been much better lately. His 20-point, 10-assist game against St. Mary's really kind of put the nail in the coffin and how great of a point guard he has been this year. Again, 6.5 assists per game is marvelous. The turnover numbers plummeted as we got into conference play. His confidence level, the two-man game with him and Ike has been nearly unstoppable since that Kentucky game. And I think Ryan Nembhard is the second best newcomer in the conference behind Graham Ike. And again, that's with apologies to Jonathan Mobo. I do think Ike is ultimately going to win this award. But since we've been speaking about Jonathan Mobo, I think he's going to win Defensive Player of the Year. That's my prediction for who I think is going to win, and also who I would pick to win Defensive Player of the Year. He's averaging 10.3 rebounds per game. He's averaging a double-double on the year. He's also averaging 1.7 steals and just under 1 block. He leads the WCC in both steals and steals per game as a center, as a post. He is second in defensive rebounds behind Michael Ajayi at Pepperdine. He is 6th in blocks. He is 1st in defensive win shares. He is 2nd in defensive box plus minus, and he's also 2nd in defensive rating. In both those categories, the only player ahead of him is Joshua Jefferson, who I strongly consider despite the fact that he's missing the last couple of games. Jefferson not getting a chance to play defense against Gonzaga in that last game, I think, hurts him a little bit. But Mobo deserves some recognition. If he's not going to win Player of the Year, if he's not going to win Newcomer of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, it's not just like we're giving him an award just to give him an award. He's earned it. His numbers point to him earning it. It's unfortunate because it's probably going to block Anton Watson from winning Defensive Player of the Year, which there's never really been a year where he hasn't deserved it. But I think the way that this is going to shake out probably points to Mobo being your defensive player of the year instead of Watson. And there's a strong argument on both sides. Again, a lot of what Watson does doesn't show up defensively, but some of these rate stats like the box plus minus and win shares, Watson shows up very favorably in those, but he's still behind Mobo. He's still behind Jefferson in those stats. So I think that it's probably going to go Mobo's way. And then the last two, sixth man of the year, Braden Huff. I struggled with this one a little bit because I don't know what the rules are. I ruled out Dominic Harris. Dom started 13 of the 24 games he played this year. That's more than half. He started well more than half the games he played in the WCC. I'm also ruling out Ben Gregg. Right now, Ben Gregg has played 30 games. He started 14. Technically, that's below half. However, he has started far more than half the games he's played against WCC competition. And in my mind, that's sort of against the spirit of how we should determine a WCC-specific sixth man of the year award. So I'm going with Braden. 10 points per game, 3.7 boards, 72.5% on two-pointers, which is just ludicrous levels of efficiency. I mean, that's obscene. Basically making 3/4 of his shots from inside the arc. He's also shooting 34% from three, which has dipped from where it was earlier in the year, but that's still really good for a freshman center. The impact for Huff has been a bit inconsistent. He's had his struggles defensively. He's had his games where he's gone quiet. But the other players considered for this award, Tyree Bryan at Santa Clara, 8 points, about 4 boards, 41% from three. Ryan Beasley at San Francisco, 8 points, 2.5 boards, 2 assists, 35% from three. They're just not as good as Braden Huff. They're not as impactful as him. Both those guys are very good. But Braden Huff is a better basketball player than them. He had more impact for Gonzaga than them. So I think he's the one who should win this award. And I that's my prediction as well. That's who I think they're ultimately going to give it to. Closing it out with freshman of the year, Tyler Harris from Portland is my pick here. Honorable mentions go to Kevin Patton Jr. at San Diego, who I think the committee is going to pick, or who the WCC is going to pick. I think this award is going to go to Kevin Patton. I think it should go to Tyler Harris. With respect to Patton, with respect to Ryan Beasley, who I mentioned earlier, with respect to Braden Huff and Dusty Stromer, Tyler Harris, 12 points per game, 7.3 rebounds per game, a little over an assist. He's also averaging about 1 steal and 1 block per game, about 50% on twos, about 36% from three. He's played 22 games. He's missed some games because of injury, which could hurt him in the voting, but he's played about 34 minutes per night. From the jump, I went to Portland's first game of the year this year. When they announced Tyler Harris, I was like, I don't know who that is. I follow the WCC really closely. I was surprised that they were starting somebody that I'd never heard of. Looked him up, saw he was a freshman. I was like, okay, they're starting a freshman. This kid must be good. He looked amazing in that first game, and throughout the year, he's been fantastic. He's a 6'8" guard. He can shoot the three. He's a great rebounder. Like, this kid is really good. And Kevin Patton at San Diego is really good as well. But they're kind of similar vibe, like 6'8" guards who are good defenders, good three-point shooters. But I'm leaning Tyler Harris as being the better player and the more impactful player this year. But I think that because he didn't play as many games, because San Diego had a better record, I think Kevin Patton Jr. is going to be who wins the award. Well, the Lady Zags are in the top 15 now of the AP poll and in the latest NCAA tournament reveal, showing them as a potential 4 seed. We're going to talk about what the upcoming WCC tournament means for Coach Lisa Fortier's squad after a word from today's sponsor, Nissan. Folks, are you the kind of driver that likes to push things just a little bit further? Have you ever wondered what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for both city drives and great escapes. And if you need something, you can call on the class-exclusive built-in Google Assistant. Gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and the Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure. Or how about the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder, which has room for up to 8, an expansive cargo capacity, and advanced available 4x4 capability. With 284 horsepower and up to 6,000 pounds of towing capacity. When adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there to answer. So take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or the Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com. All right, folks, closing out the show today, talking Lisa Fortier and the Gonzaga women's basketball program. They climbed to 15th in the AP poll. 1 spot up from 16 to 15. They also only moved 1 spot up at the net from 12 to 11. I highlight that because while we're happy The women's basketball team is moving in the right direction in the AP poll and the net, which I know is a computer system. There's no bias there. What Gonzaga did in their regular season finale against the Portland Pilots, this game was on ESPNU. It was highlighted as like it was like supposed to be the comparable Gonzaga versus St. Mary's closing out the men's season versus Gonzaga versus Portland closing out the women's season. This was how how ESPN identified it when they started making the schedule way back last year before the season started. Portland beat Gonzaga in the WCC tournament last year. Portland earned a bid in the NCAA tournament, cost Gonzaga significant seed capital. They fell all the way to a 9 seed, lost in that first round. This time around, Gonzaga and Portland, the Zags won by 50. 90-40 was the final score in this game. It's the second 50-plus point margin of victory for the Zags this season. They have 2 of them. One of them was against Pacific, the 4th best team in the conference. Portland's 3rd. They beat them both by 50-plus points. 5 Zags were in double figures in this game. Brenda Maxwell had 19 and 5. Kaylee Trung had 18 on 4 of 8 shooting. Yvonne Ejim had 17 points and 5 boards. Zags made 10 threes in this game on 42% shooting, shot about 53% from the field. Just what they've been doing all year long. Just an obscene level of dominance from the Lady Zags. They finished the season 29-2. They're 16-0 in the WCC. Perfection in the West Coast Conference. Their 13-point victory over Pacific the second time they played them was the closest game in conference play. 13 points. 13 of their 16 wins were by 20 or more points. All but 3. And if I'm not mistaken, one of them was 19 points. I think the other one was 18 points, and then the 13-point win over Pacific. So 13, 18, 19, every other game was 20 or more points that they won by. Folks, 8 of their 16 games were by 25 or more points. Half of the times that Gonzaga suited up and played an opponent in their same conference, they beat them by 25 or more points. Half the time. Santa Clara, the presumed second best team in the conference, they beat them by 35-plus points twice. I mean, I don't know what else to say about this team. I mean, that level of dominance is unprecedented. It is unheard of. It is unbelievable. And it is not getting the press that it deserves. People will talk about how not good the WCC is compared to Gonzaga, and they're not wrong, but that conversation should be had about how great Gonzaga is and not like, oh, wow, the rest of the WCC is really terrible. Like, yeah, if you put LSU in the WCC, they would do something similar to this. If you put Stanford in the WCC, they'd do something similar to this. I believe that. But we're acting like most, and I don't know, we're not necessarily, but certain people are acting like most Power 6 teams tossed into this year's WCC on the women's basketball side would do the same thing. And I promise you they would not. I promise you they would not. There's a lot of them that would probably go 16-0 against this particular crop of teams, but I don't think there's a lot of teams that would win 8 of those games by 25-plus points. They would win 13 of them by 20-plus. That wouldn't have a single game within single digits. I just don't buy it. I don't buy it. Zags are up to 11th at the net, which seems to indicate that the net believes that they are one of borderline the top 10 teams in the entire country. They're the highest mid-major team by a huge margin. The next highest team that is not in a Power 6 conference is UNLV. They're 30th. Princeton is next at 31st, right behind them. But Gonzaga is in a league of their own in terms of being a non-Power 6 team and their success on the women's basketball side. Now, the main conversation is whether Gonzaga will get a top 4 seed in the NCAA tournament. The most recent projection had them as the 15th seeded team, which would put them as a 4 seed. At the time, the 14th seeded team was Colorado. Colorado then got boat raced by Oregon State very recently after that. So it's possible Colorado would slip, giving Gonzaga a little bit more certainty as being one of those top 4 seeds. For me, if Gonzaga wins the WCC tournament, and it's hard to imagine they don't, they will be a 4 seed in the NCAA tournament. And they will be a 4 seed playing in Portland. And I will hopefully be at those games. Depends on when some of the men's games are, depends on some other stuff going on, but I am hoping to be at those games where Gonzaga is hosting in Portland as a 4 seed. There's still a part of me that is concerned that Oregon State will get that 4 seed and Gonzaga will get that 5 seed. Oregon State is a higher ranked team in the AP poll, despite being not as highly regarded in the net. Oregon State has also lost 3 of their last 5 games. So I feel like Gonzaga is the more likely pick. It does, if Oregon State runs through the Pac-12 tournament and they beat teams like Stanford and Colorado, who they recently beat, and USC and other really good programs in that conference. Because again, Gonzaga is going to win 2 games against teams that aren't very good. Oregon State could win 4 games against much better teams. If they do that, that could push Gonzaga back to that 5 seed. It would be unfortunate. It would be, I think, undeserved. I think Gonzaga deserves to be a 4 seed. I would rather them be playing in Portland than getting a 4 seed somewhere across the country. But I am curious how that's going to shake out, because I think this team has clearly earned a top 4 seed. And I hope that the Selection Monday committee for the women's side sees that and determines that. Of course, Gonzaga's got to go take care of business in Las Vegas. That's step 1. Go do that. Go win your 2 games. See if you can do 20-plus point victories yet again. Send your statement to the committee, and hopefully you find yourself on that 4 line in Portland in a couple of weeks. It's going to wrap it up for us today. I'll be back on Wednesday recapping those WCC awards, talking some Zags in the NBA as well. Hoping to get some guests lined up for the end of the week as we get ready for the WCC tournament coming up early next week. Thanks again to those of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. And until next time, as always, go Zags.